The scent of damp earth and old oil hung heavy in the air of the garage. Rain lashed against the corrugated metal roof, a furious percussion that swallowed every other sound. His hands, strong and sure, framed my face, thumbs, tracing the delicate skin under my eyes. My breath caught in my throat, a ragged gasp, as his mouth found mine, desperate and hungry. There was no gentleness, no hesitant exploration, just an immediate, overwhelming press of bodies. The cold, concrete floor pressed against my back through my thin sweater, a stark contrast to the sudden consuming heat that flared between us. I felt the tremor in his arms, the slight give of his knees, as he leaned into me, his weight anchoring me, trapping me. Guilt. A cold, sharp blade twisted in my gut, even as I arched into his touch, a silent primal response that shamed me. I used to believe I could resist something like this. I was wrong. I was 43, married a mother. He was 25, my husband's son from his first marriage, and here we were hidden in the shadows of a place meant for storage, and forgotten things becoming one of them. Every beat of my heart screamed wrong, 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 but every nerve ending sang a different tune, one of desperate, forbidden relief. His rough denim against my bare leg, the insistent pressure of his body, the ragged rhythm of our breathing echoing the storm outside. It was all too real, too raw, too undeniably human. This wasn't a decision. It was a moment, a collapse of all my carefully constructed walls, and I didn't stop it. The rain hammered harder, a deafening roar that seemed to mock the fragile silence we created between desperate kisses. His fingers tangled in my hair, pulling me closer, deeper, until there was no space left between us, no room for thought, only sensation. This was an abandonment, a betrayal of everything I held sacred. And yet, in the heart of that forbidden embrace, I found a terrible, shameful comfort. This was a line I never thought I'd cross, and now that I had, I was plummeting into an abyss I couldn't escape. If you've ever felt caught between what you know is right and what your body screams for, if you understand the kind of loneliness that makes you reach for the most dangerous comfort, then tell me, what did you do? Share your thoughts in the comments, or let me know if you want to hear more of this story, because I don't know how it ends. My life with Robert, my husband, had become a quiet, carefully curated existence. 20 years, 2 decades of shared meals, shared silences, shared responsibilities. We had built a comfortable house in the suburbs, raised a daughter who was now away at college, and settled into a rhythm that felt both secure and suffocating. The hum of the dishwasher was often the loudest sound in our evenings. Robert was a good man, steady, reliable, but the emotional landscape between us had grown barren. He was often absorbed in his work or his hobbies, and I had become an extension of the house part of the furniture. I remembered a particular Tuesday a year or so back. It was our anniversary. I'd spent the afternoon making his favorite meal, set the table with our best china. He came home late, tired and barely noticed. "Looks good," he'd mumbled already, halfway to the TV. What happens when the woman who once looked at you like everything now walks past you like nothing? That was the core of it, the profound, aching invisibility. I had a habit, a small secret ritual that spoke volumes about my loneliness. Every night after Robert was asleep, I'd take long, scalding hot showers, the steam fogging the mirror, blurring my reflection until I could barely recognize myself. It was the only place where the constant hum of my anxieties could be drowned out, if only for a few minutes. I'd stand there letting the water beat against my skin, trying to wash away the feeling of being utterly unseen. And then there was Liam, Robert's son from his first marriage. He'd always been a polite, distant presence, visiting a few times a year. After he graduated and started working, he'd started coming around more often, helping Robert with odd jobs around the house sometimes, just dropping by to talk to his father. He was a stark contrast to Robert's quiet reliability. Liam was all restless energy, a sharp wit, and eyes that saw too much. He carried a certain masculine trait, a kind of protective energy that was almost unsettling. He wasn't overtly charming, but there was a quiet intensity about him, a buried craving that I felt before I even understood it. I knew almost from the first moment I started to notice him, truly notice him, that he was dangerous, emotionally dangerous. And the guilt began to prick at me. Even then, a faint persistent ache, long before anything tangible had happened. It was the guilt of simply seeing him, of letting myself be seen in a way I hadn't been in years. The air between us grew heavier, with unspoken words, thick with the weight of burgeoning desire and the constant nagging presence of guilt. It started with long glances across the dinner table when Robert was distracted by the news. His eyes, dark and intense, would meet mine, and a silent current would pass between us, a recognition of something forbidden. Then came the accidental touches. Passing in the narrow hallway, his hand would brush my arm, lingering just a fraction too long, or reaching for the same coffee cup in the morning, our fingers brushing, sending a jolt through me that felt both thrilling and terrifying. These weren't grand gestures, just subtle shifts in the air, barely perceptible to anyone but us, yet they spoke volumes. One Saturday afternoon, Robert was out golfing, and Liam had come over to help me sort through some old boxes in the attic. The air up there was thick with dust and memories, and the confined space amplified the tension. I was holding up an old photo album, a picture of Robert and me on our wedding day, young and beaming. Liam leaned in closer, his shoulder brushing mine, and his voice was a low murmur against the quiet. "You look happy there," he said, his gaze fixed on the photo, but I felt the weight of his eyes on me. It wasn't a question, more like a quiet observation, but it carried an undertone of longing, of something missed. I froze, holding my breath, acutely aware of his nearness, the subtle scent of his skin, and the silent question hanging in the dusty air. I tried to pull away to put distance between us, to remind myself of the impossible chasm. "We shouldn't be doing this," I whispered, my voice barely audible, clutching the photo album like a shield. My heart was pounding, a frantic drum in my chest. He just looked at me, his eyes unwavering. "Why do you keep coming back then?" His question wasn't accusatory, but laced with a raw honesty that pierced through my defenses. It was a mirror reflecting my own dangerous choices. He took the album from my trembling hands, his fingers brushing mine again, and this time he didn't let go. He held my gaze, and then his voice barely a whisper. He said, "I always wondered what it would feel like to be the one you looked at that way, the way you're looking at me now." It wasn't a pickup line. It was a confession spilling out messy and unbidden, revealing a depth of longing that had clearly been festering for years. And in that confined, dusty space filled with the ghosts of my past, I felt myself surrender. The argument with Robert had been simmering for weeks, a slow burn of unspoken frustrations. It wasn't a shouting match, not really. It was worse. It was the quiet, chilling indifference that had settled between us, like a heavy shroud. That particular Tuesday, it had been about the leaky faucet I'd asked him to fix for months, a small thing that became a symbol of all the unattended needs in our marriage. He'd just shrugged, "I'll get to it, and walked away, leaving me standing in the kitchen, feeling utterly dismissed. It was that feeling of being completely unacknowledged, of my needs being trivialized, that finally cracked something open inside me. Liam had shown up shortly after, unannounced, carrying a toolbox. He'd seen my exasperated sigh from the driveway. Dad mentioned the faucet. He said, his voice quiet, his eyes searching mine. He didn't push, didn't pry. He just walked straight to the sink and started working. The small confined space of the kitchen suddenly filled with the scent of pipe sealant, and the low clinking of tools became intensely charged. I watched him, the way the muscles in his arms flexed, the quiet concentration on his face, and then he looked up, caught my gaze, and a silent understanding passed between us. The anger at Robert, the deep well of loneliness, it all funneled into that single electric moment. "I didn't just want tonight," he murmured, his voice rough, almost a confession, as he stood up, the wrench still in his hand. He stepped closer, the small kitchen suddenly feeling impossibly small. I've wanted this for years. His eyes, dark and intense, held a raw vulnerability that stripped away any last pretense. It wasn't a smooth line. It was a desperate admission, years of buried desire finally spilling out. And in that moment, as the afternoon light streamed through the kitchen window, highlighting the dust motes dancing in the air, I crumbled. He reached for me, his calloused hands warm against my skin, pulling me against him. The faint smell of pipe sealant mixed with his own unique scent, something clean and masculine, filled my senses. My hands found their way to his neck, clinging to the warmth of his skin. Our mouths met a desperate collision, full of the frustration and longing that had simmered for so long. The counter pressed into my back, cool and unyielding, a stark contrast to the urgent heat that enveloped us. There was a desperate rhythm to our breathing, to the press of our bodies, a silent primal language spoken in the heart of my ordinary kitchen. The dripping of the now fixed faucet, a steady rhythmic sound, became the only witness to the dangerous act. It was overwhelming, conflicted, and terrifyingly real. I wished I could say I hated it. I wish I could lie to you, and to myself. The aftermath clung to me like a second skin, a suffocating garment woven from guilt and illicit memory. I tried to rationalize it, to tell myself it was a momentary lapse, a consequence of years of neglect, just a release, a pressure valve. But the hollow ache in my chest, the way my stomach clenched whenever Robert looked at me, told a different story. I walked through the house in a haze, the familiar walls now feeling like the boundaries of a gilded cage. Every surface seemed to carry a phantom touch, every shadow a whispered word. The kitchen where it had happened became a torture chamber. The scent of coffee, usually a comfort, now brought back the metallic tang of fear and the raw scent of his skin. I scrubbed the counters until they gleamed as if I could scour away the memory, but it was etched deeper than any surface. The subtle thrum of the refrigerator, once a benign background noise, now hummed with the silent accusation of my betrayal. I'd find myself standing in the middle of the laundry room, a clean shirt in my hands, and the faintest ghost of his masculine scent. A mix of something fresh and earthy would hit me. It wasn't unpleasant, not at all, which made the shame even worse. It was a sensory trigger, a cruel reminder of the warmth, the pressure, the undeniable pleasure that had laced through the profound wrongness. The quiet had become unbearable. The silence between Robert and me, once just indifference, now screamed with my secret. I'd catch myself staring at him across the dinner table, really looking at him, and for the first time in years, I saw the lines of age around his eyes, the slight slump of his shoulders, the quiet dignity of a man who believed in the life he had built. And I had shattered it not with an explosion, but with a whisper, a touch, a shared moment of desperate forbidden hunger. I wanted to confess, to rip the secret from my chest, but the words felt like jagged glass in my throat. I couldn't bear the thought of destroying him, or us, or what was left of us. I don't know if I want to stop, or if I just want to stop hating myself for not. The almost exposure came not from a person, but from a misplaced object. I was cleaning out the laundry room, the scent of detergent, a familiar comfort when I found it. A single dark button, not one of Robert's, not one of mine. It was from Liam's favorite worn denim jacket, the one he wore almost constantly. My blood ran cold. He must have lost it during that night in the garage, or maybe even in the kitchen. I clutched the button in my hand, a tiny innocuous thing that suddenly felt like a ticking bomb. Anyone could have found it. Clara, David, anyone. The weight of it in my palm was immense, a physical manifestation of my terrible secret. A profound self-awareness hit me then, sharp and cruel. I saw myself not as the victim of loneliness, but as an architect of deceit. The woman staring back at me from the smudged reflection in the laundry room window wasn't just a wife who had strayed. She was someone who had actively pursued a dangerous comfort, who had allowed herself to be drawn into a morally corrosive dance. I realized with a sickening clarity that the act itself was only part of the betrayal. The true corruption was in the knowing, the hiding the slow, insidious rot of my own conscience. Later that evening, Liam called his voice on the phone, sounding more distant than usual, almost formal. "I won't be coming by for a while," he said without offering an explanation. I think it's for the best." There was a weariness in his tone, a subtle resignation that suggested he too was grappling with the weight of our transgression. He was pulling away, and the sudden absence after the intensity of our connection left a gaping void. I stood by the kitchen window, watching the streetlights flicker on one by one. The empty space on the countertop, where his toolbox had sat, felt vast and cold. I walked to the living room and picked up the framed wedding photo, the one I'd held in the attic, and for a long moment I simply stared at it. Then with a trembling hand, I turned it face down on the mantelpiece. The subtle click of the frame against the wood echoed in the quiet room, a small definitive gesture in a life now defined by what was hidden. Is living with the truth worth destroying everything sacred?